Good morning. This is Lynn Gordon, Extension Beef Fields Cow-Calves Field Specialist with SDSU Extension. And today I'm at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association at Cattleman College in Tampa, Florida, and had the opportunity to interview some of the speakers that were brought in for this 20th anniversary of Cattleman College. And today joining me is Bob Cambell. Bob was one of the speakers on a panel in one of the sessions today. And so I'm going to let Bob introduce himself and tell us a little bit more about what he discussed in his session. Well,
hi, Lynn. Bob Cambell. I'm with Farm Credit Service America, and I'm a Senior Vice President. And I work with our producers and our teams in Nebraska and Wyoming primarily. And so in our panel discussion today, we talked about credit availability in production agriculture today, particularly the beef industry, what it takes. We spoke a lot about risk management. We talked a lot about producers need to understand their break-evens more now than they ever have because of all the volatility that's out there. The general theme was there's plenty of credit out there for people to get, but you've got to be able to manage your risk and have a really solid business plan around that. And so we talked a lot about that. We talked a lot about succession planning and what it takes for the next generation to get involved with as expensive as it is today to be in production agriculture and the livestock industry. How do we do that? And we talked about how do veteran producers team up with younger producers and try to find ways to work together to let the older transition out, but let the younger ones transition in. And it's a tough conversation, but it's one that needs to keep being had.
So you talk a little bit about a business plan and the importance of the producers having a business plan. What are some of the key components to get started to when they come in and visit with their credit officer, or I'm sure most of them have done that, but where do they need to go now in such a volatile market in developing a business plan?
Lynn, when we talk to our customers or producers around it, we want them to be able to articulate what is our business model, what do we hope to accomplish, and how do I manage my risks around this? So if I'm a cow-calf producer, do I have to buy all my hay, or do I raise all my hay? And if it doesn't rain, how do I get my hay? Or if I'm buying it, how do I know I'm going to get it? Just in today's world, especially with the drought that we're facing in the areas that we run in. And so it comes down to being able to articulate what your plan is and what your backup plan is if that doesn't work. And so they've got to think out next year and the next couple of years out to say, what's my plan B? Or as one speaker said, plan C, plan D, and plan E probably, because of all the volatility that's facing us. What if we have $8 corn versus what if we have $3.75 corn? What does that do to your operation? Today's interest rates are really low. What if they spike up? Are you managing that risk today? So we're asking a lot of questions and hoping that they have an answer for how it affects their own individual operation and their own circumstance, because every operation is different.
And you're based in Nebraska, and as you said, you cover Nebraska and Wyoming, so obviously the producers from South Dakota that are representative of the area that I represent are facing many of the similar issues as well, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, and our company, we work in South Dakota as well, and Iowa, and so we're very in tune with what's going on in South Dakota from that standpoint. And they're facing the same issues we are in Nebraska. We've had a really dry 2012. We're wondering if it's going to rain, and we've got high commodity prices on the grain side. We've got livestock prices that are high, but we're not seeing the profit levels that we probably should be seeing. So how do we manage all that? I think it's the same conversation regardless of what side of the border you're on. And it's how do we manage the risk, and how do we keep our operations viable going forward?
Do you have any specific tips on managing that risk, or some things you've seen that producers in this last year that was tough getting through that was successful?
I think at first the thing we've got to be able to figure out is what's it going to take to run your operation, or what's your break even? And once you understand that, then you can start saying, okay, so what's the impact if my hay price is 150% higher than last year, or it's lower, or I find an opportunity to buy it cheaper, or what if I said the grain prices go up or cattle prices move around? But you got to start with the base understanding of your own operation and understanding where you sit today, what are your plans for the future, and what do you got to do now to take those steps. And so it really comes down to understanding where you're at today and then developing your plan from there. And it's really interesting today that we still have a vast majority of producers who can't really articulate what their break-even is, whether it's corn, cattle, they aren't down to that level of understanding their operation, and they need to get there.
And just in closing, you said that some of your discussion was about some farm transitioning and how important, with the amount of risk management and the amount of dollars we're talking about in agriculture operations now. What was just some of the brief discussion on tips for that older generation to start working with the younger generation and transitioning that capital?
The biggest conversation is just having the family have the conversation. So, do the kids want to come back? And if they do want to come back, how do we start that conversation? And who else do we need to bring in to help us with that conversation? Most families aren't probably equipped to have that kind of a conversation because there's some emotions tied to it. And so, who else can help us make those decisions? Whether it's an advisor, a family advisor, a lawyer, maybe their lender, whoever. But help them have those conversations. Or if you have an operation that doesn't have any succession coming behind it, mom and dad don't have anybody coming back, is that an opportunity to go find some young producers who want to get in the industry and give them a chance to get started? And I think the University of Nebraska at Curtis started a 100 cow program. Dr. Weldon Slide had that started, and Wyoming's got a program called Wagon, and I think other states are starting to come on with programs that bring those two groups together to have the conversation of how do we create an equity partnership so that we can transition into the next generation, but realizing they're short on capital, but probably long on work, long on talent, long on hunger to get started. We need the older generation to help that transition. So, but they got to start talking, and that's the main thing.
Yes, and in South Dakota we have similar programs too. We have of course, beginning farmer programs, as well as a new program we've started where it's a mentoring program for the older generation and the newer generation, whether they're going to be taking over the farming operation or not. So thank you very much, Bob, for your time and for presenting here at the 2013 Cattleman's College in Tampa.